Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 122 for the week ending September 28th, 2018, the Kavanaugh, Rosenstein, and 100 Wins edition. But first, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitors is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 700 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's compliance and ethics programs, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com. Some of the stories Jay and I take a look at this week include Petrobras coming in with a $1.78 billion FCPA settlement, a speech by Deputy Attorney General Matthew Minor, settlement of a former Chilean mining official on FCPA charges. We take a look at Jonathan Marks' article on what Freud has to do with fraud. FIFA's back in the news regarding corruption. Elon Musk was sued by the Securities and Exchange Commission and may be stripped of the right to run a public company. Another non-U.S. citizen receives a whistleblower award. We ask the question, what is a remediation management office? And conclude by taking a look at a great article by Allison Taylor about what ethics and compliance means to corporations in 2018. It's certainly more than clearing red flags and performing due diligence. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 122 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending September 28th, 2018, the Kavanaugh, Rosenstein, and 100 Win edition. As always, I'm joined by my colleague, good friend, and cohort, Mr. Monitors himself, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Hey, Tom. Greetings from Los Angeles. It's been a heck of a week, hasn't it?
Yes, Jay. As the administration has gone bonkers over the Kavanaugh nomination, and of course, earlier this week, and it seems like 3 years ago, Rod Rosenstein, he's in. Nope, he's out. Nope, he's in drama. And our two favorite baseball teams are already having 100 plus wins. We actually had a pretty big week in the world of ethics and compliance. So let's just jump right into it. What was number one on your list?
All right. And first of all, just so there's no confusion, I want to let you know, Tom, that this podcast is being recorded. So if there's ever anything that's in dispute that we've said, we're both aware that we're being recorded right now as we speak. So anyhow, number one on the list is the name that we had in the news probably 2-3 years ago that was dominating FCPA news. Petrobras has reached a $1.78 billion, that's with a B, FCPA resolution. And Petrobras entered into a non-prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice that included a criminal penalty of $853 million. Under the NPA, Petrobras will pay 10% or $85.3 million of the criminal penalty to the DOJ and another 10% to the SEC. Petrobras will pay the remaining 80%, $682.5 million, to the Ministério Público Federal in Brazil. So in the SEC enforcement action, Petrobras agreed to disgorge $933.5 million. So staggering numbers, but it really brings to close Operation Car Wash, and I think really ties things up. We're going to link to show notes from the FCPA blog, and then we also had some writings from Aruna Viswanatha, Jeffrey Lewis, and Sam Rubenfeld. Did they have any specific take on their thing, Tom?
Well, just a couple of things I'd like to add, Jay. First of all, Petrobras is not required to have a monitor, and I think this is a pretty stunning development, particularly considering how corrupt Petrobras was. It really speaks to a couple of things, I think. One, the organizational desire to change and to self-correct and to work towards that great remediation that they had to go through, although it is an ongoing remediation. The second thing is it really speaks to the credibility Petrobras was able to engender with the Department of Justice, particularly considering that it was the bribery and corruption was really at the highest levels of the organization, senior management, the board, and that the company really completely cleaned house. So to not require a monitor shows that the Department of Justice has a pretty good sense that you will follow the agreements that you have made, in this case, in a non-prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice and in a cease and desist order with the Securities and Exchange Commission. So I think I would say we have to give Petrobras some kudos for that. I don't think many people would have expected them to come out of this at the end of the day without a monitor. Second of all, in a really interesting follow-up post today, Dick Cassin put Petrobras in the top 10 of FCPA cases. Now, top 10 of FCPA cases is separate and apart from top international anti-corruption enforcement actions. So I have a list of the top 10. This does come in number 3 on the top international list. But Dick puts it in the FCPA settlement, and he lays out his logic, and he does acknowledge that the resolution could be valued in other ways. Nevertheless, he gives a rational basis for putting Petrobras squarely in the FCPA settlement, and it comes down to essentially that the fines and penalties of $1.78 billion, and even with $1 billion not being what it used to be worth, it's still a lot of greenbacks. That was a part of the FCPA resolution, and this is an FCPA enforcement action where the Department of Justice noted that some 80% of the total fine and penalty was being paid to the Brazilian prosecutors or the Brazilian government. So there was a legal duty and is a legal duty on Petrobras to pay, and simply because part of that is paid to the Brazilian government, in Dick Cassin's opinion, that does not take away from this as being an FCPA resolution. So I thought that was a really interesting analysis for him to take. Even if you don't accept that this is a total FCPA case, it's certainly a total amount for fraud and bribery and corruption. So kudos to Petrobras for getting this result. A non-prosecution agreement means there's no criminal sanction against Petrobras, which Petrobras has tooted its horn about, and I believe that's something they could do. We should also note, Jay, that Petrobras had previously paid $2.9 billion to settle a shareholder derivative action for the actions of the U.S. companies, the Petrobras USA, all related to this. So really a massive case, whatever bucket you put it in, it's one that's going to be sliced and diced. I'm going to be blogging about it several days next week, and I think it's going to be studied for many years to come, Jay.
And it looks like Siemens is moving down the list now. They're at number 3. So we haven't seen any big movement up in the top 5 for a while.
Well, actually, certainly in the domestic list, the FCPA list. But remember, in 2017, we had Telia at $965 million. But in the international list, really, it's the top 3 are now from 2017 or late 2016, 2017, and now 2018. So, it's not the real money that billions were when you were, blowing and going, Jay, but we'll count it as a big one even in 2018.
So next up, Tom, we have remarks from Deputy Assistant Attorney General Matt Miner that he made at the 5th Annual GIR New York Live event. What did Mr. Miner have to say?
Well, Jay, as we enter the kind of fall conference season, we will see more and more Department of Justice officials out on the speaker circuit, and they'll be in some cases giving a retrospective, which is part of what Matthew Miner did, looking back over the year in FCPA enforcement, FCPA issues. He made the speech the same day Petrobras was announced, so it was clearly something that he talked about. He indicated the 25% discount given to Petrobras because of their extraordinary cooperation. That, of course, is separate and apart from the lack of monitorship that I talked about in our segment number one. But also he talked about the FCPA Corporate Enforcement Policy enacted in late November 2017, and in this year's editions of the anti-piling on policy, which we clearly saw in the Petrobras settlement, how it applies internationally, and the M&A part, which was to write in that the mergers, there was now a permanent and safe harbor reflected in the U.S. Senate's U.S. Attorney's Manual. He also gave a shout out to our friend Dan Kahn, who heads the FCPA unit, for his leading that unit through some of the biggest settlements over the past literally several years, but certainly within the past 18 months. And also he re-emphasized a point that he has talked about several times, which is his view of the department is with partnership with corporations to fight the international scourge of bribery, corruption leading to terrorism. And he wants corporations to help in that fight. He believes the Department of Justice has incentivized corporations to come forward and report instances of bribery and corruption through the new FCPA Corporate Enforcement Policy. We will probably hear some more about this, but that's a change that has been coming. And now we see the department really articulating the position formally that they view corporations as partners, not necessarily adversaries. You can certainly be an adversary if you engage in criminal conduct, but if you come forward, self-disclose and meet the other requirements under the FCPA Corporate Enforcement Policy, I think you'll be treated much more leniently going forward.
So it's interesting to hear that recap and where we've been for the last 16 months. And if you remember that podcast and the ebook we did with Matt and with Mike Volkov, and taking a look at, how seriously is the administration going to take enforcement, it seems like things have been moving right along. Indeed. So now we go back again to FCPA Blog. And we're talking about SQM, Chile-based chemical and mining company. And on Tuesday, the former CEO, Patricio Contes Gonzalez, agreed to pay $125,000 to resolve civil charges that he violated the FCPA Act. This was in addition to this was actually due to making nearly $15 million in improper payments to Chilean political figures and others connected to them. Last year, SQM paid $30 million to settle and civil and criminal FCPA charges. The company paid a criminal penalty to the DOJ of $15.5 million, and the SEC settled with the CEO Monday through an administrative order. So this again has been one that we've been following for the past few years. The bribery actually went back from 1990 to 2015, and starting in 2008, SQM paid nearly $15 million to these politicians. So again, we're seeing things coming to us out of South America and in mining and materials, which is always an area that is rife with potential FCPA shortfalls.
So next we had a part two of a two-part article, Jay, by our good friend Jonathan Marks. Jonathan writes and posts in numerous places, but he has his own site, boardandfraud.com. And in it, he has part two of a two-part posting entitled Putting Freud in Fraud. In part one, he looked at true Freudianisms in the behavioral elements of fraud. And in this part two, he calls it environmental elements. I might have called it structural elements. Nevertheless, he does incorporate some Freudian concepts in there in terms of taking a look at weak tone at the top and conduct perhaps more structural, but also vulnerable cultures, loose links between ethics and compliance going forward. As always, it's jam-packed with links. It's a very great resource for you, as everything Jonathan posts, so we commend you to it. We also have more news about FIFA, Jay. What did we have from our friends at the most corrupt international soccer organization around?
Well, this comes to us from Law 360, and it says the ex-soccer boss wants a $50 million restitution request tossed. And this is basically in a memorandum filed on Friday. Juan Angel Naput, the former head of the South American Football Confederation, known as CONMEBOL, argued that the Mandatory Victims Restoration Act only allows for restitution for participation in a government investigation. However, CONMEBOL, FIFA, and the Confederation of North and Central America and Caribbean Football Association, known as CONCACAF, performed internal investigations. Naput was convicted in December of racketeering and other charges related to schemes where sports marketing companies funneled monies, hundreds of millions of dollars, into bribes. So this is, again, I guess, I don't know if you would call it a residual action in the FIFA matter, but this one is a gift that still keeps on giving. Tom, anything particular you want to address in this one?
You know, Jay, it's just a continuation of the FIFA scandal, which broke initially in 2015. The follow-on cases, we still may have some additional work, or the Department of Justice may have some additional work to do. FIFA itself has decided transparency is not going to be something part of its future and is becoming much more opaque again. So that doesn't bode well. But good to see, or clear to see, the Department of Justice still moving forward on residual cases under the FIFA corruption scandal.
So now we have always a very interesting gentleman in the business and the press world. SEC sues Tesla's Elon Musk over fraud in a move that could oust him from his firm. What did Mr. Musk say, and why is it such a problem?
So, Jay, you have acknowledged many times, and as we are recording this, you will acknowledge yet again that you're a recovering screenwriter. And probably if you made up a character like this, no one would believe it. Once again, proving that not only is truth much stranger than fiction, but you can't write fiction around something like this because fiction has to be reality-based. And I don't know how you can say anything Elon Musk does is reality-based, whether it's going on and puffing on a smoke of questionable origin on a podcast, or sleeping on the floor of his assembly line. But the thing that went on here, to recap, he sent out a tweet, not a press release, that he was taking the company private. He had a valuation in mind of $420 a share, and that he had funding lined up. Well, it turned out that last part was not true, or at least as alleged by the SEC, that he did not have funding lined up. I was somewhat stunned this morning, Jay, to read that the way he determined the $420 amount was largely based on wisdom from his girlfriend that told him that was a significant number in the marijuana industry. So if you recall, the CEO of Wells Fargo wanted customers to purchase 8 loan products or bank products because 8 is great. Well, here we have a share price based upon a valuation that largely based on Mary Jane and her followers. So if you'd written that in a screenplay, you probably would have been laughed out. But it gets even more bizarre, Jay, because it turned out that yesterday, when the SEC filed its action in the afternoon, early in the morning, they had actually drafted a settlement with Musk. And both parties had agreed to the settlement. No word what that settlement was. But that late morning, Musk's lawyers called the SEC to say, whoops, no settlement. And so the SEC sued Musk. Let me emphasize that point. The SEC has not sued Tesla. They have sued Elon Musk personally for his actions. And Why you would pull out of an agreed settlement at the last minute is only known to probably not even his lawyers, but to Mr. Musk. And but by doing so, he has put himself in really a very dangerous position, because if he goes to trial and if he loses, the judge can levy the sanction of banning him from public company work and being a senior executive or on the board of a public company. And that's, his companies are public. Now, I suppose Mary Jane and her $420 a share valuation could still be resurrected if he could find the funding for it and take the company private, and he wouldn't have to worry about the SEC. But that's a pretty big risk, particularly when you seem to have settled everything else. We don't know the reason. Nevertheless, he's done it. So we're going to have to follow this one. Pretty interesting. I'm going to talk to Amy next week on this, and we're going to see where it all might shake out.
Well, he was in the state of California where Mary Jane is legalized, so maybe that $420 share price is actually pretty valid. Who knows?
Who knows?
So anyhow, as of late, whistleblowers have certainly been in the news. They've been in the SEC's crosshairs, and they've been trying to pass legislations to limit the amount of awards whistleblowers. And this week, the SEC awarded an overseas whistleblower $4 million for, quote, extensive assistance, unquote, resulting in a successful action, the agency said on Monday. The chief of the SEC's whistleblowers, Jane Norberg, said whistleblowers, whether they're located in the United States or abroad, provide a valuable service to investors and help us stop wrongdoing. In Monday's order, the SEC said the outcome of the action was a direct result of the whistleblower's tip. And since 2012, the SEC has awarded over $326 million to 59 individuals. So, whistleblowing is something that we talked about earlier this morning when we did our podcast with Matt and Mike, when we wanted to have a whistleblower remain anonymous, which is really one of the foundations of that. And you can see what happens when that anonymity is broken. Next up, Tom, we've got something about addressing regulatory compliance issues with an RMO. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. Jay, this article comes to us from Maurice Gilbert's site, Corporate Compliance Insights. It is a really interesting article by two gentlemen I am not aware of, Steve Hall and Sidney Rickelman. And they talk about this concept RMO, which is a remediation management office. Now, they talk about it in the context of a regulated industry, and many of our listeners are not in regulated industries, although I think we have a dedicated fan base there. And a RMO is a program management office, which is set up to deal with lists of specific non-compliance issues that may have been identified in an audit. And certainly in a regulated company, I can see this kind of structure existing, but I thought about it in the context of a regular commercial industry. Many of affiliated monitors clients, my clients as well, Jay, and it really seemed to speak to many of the things that we look at in the regulated side of things are pretty good ideas and more mature than in commercial operations. So they suggest that there are 5 elements to look for: understand the need of the environment for remediation, corporate governance and ownership of the remediation, the need for speed of your remediation, transparency in your remediation, and then minimal impact to business. And I think that there's really a lot for the compliance professional to have in here. When you have an audit, how are you going to address its findings? Typically, if you're a CCO, if either a small shop or a solo CCO, you're going to have to take those on a risk-based priority. But with the RMO, the Remediation Management Office, even if it's an ad hoc committee, not an office, I think it really gives you a way to think through your remediation and do it much more quickly and much more efficiently. So we've, of course, cited to it, and I commend everyone to read it because you might get some good ideas out of it.
Great. And the last thing for us to wrap up with is there was an interview with Allison Taylor in the FCPA blog, and she talks about today compliance is more than due diligence and red flags. This is information from a survey that they recently did called The State of Sustainable Business. And were there any other takeaways you had from that one, Tom?
Well, Jay, really it confirms, I think, one of the things that certainly I've been writing about and frankly, Affiliated Monitors has been talking about, which are ethics and cultural values are becoming more and more critical. And it's compliance is not due diligence. It's not dealing with red flags. It is actually being much more proactive. It's much about having your values inculcated into the culture of your organization so that you engage in employees engage in ethical behavior. She pointed to the Me Too movement, the turning away of non-disclosure clauses and those types of harassment cases. But really, she talked about, and the report found that companies want to have and employees want to have ethics and integrity as a part of their culture. And I know that's something that Affiliated Monitors talks about, thinks about, writes about, and works on quite a bit. And so it was really interesting to see. We're starting to see many more of these surveys of member organizations, whether nonprofit such as BSR that Allison works for or for-profit in other places, talk about the need for moving really beyond the paper program and into an ethical culture and ethical values-based organization. So nice article by Allison, and once again, we link to it and we commend it to everyone to take a look at.
So that kind of wraps up the news for the week. Why don't you let us know where you were this past week and what's coming up besides the MLB playoffs?
So we've got this week, Jay, I was actually in your neck of the woods in Boston for some very warm, humid weather and some cool weather, putting on a compliance masterclass hosted by Affiliated Monitors, amazingly enough. So I was at the Affiliated Monitors office in Boston. We had a very good dynamic crowd, lots of different folks there that we were able to work through a couple of days of compliance masterclass. Next week, I guess actually 2 weeks from the date of this podcast and when it will be posted, I will be at Converge 18, the conference hosted by Conversant, be in Denver from October 8th through 11th. I hope you can join me for the event. Your colleague, Eric Feldman, will be there speaking. Our colleague, Mike Volkoff, will be there speaking. So listeners to this podcast can receive receive a 50% discount. And I've given the information on the discount code and the link to the registration and information on our show notes. So it's really going to be a top-notch conference. It's going to be one of the best around. If you are interested at all, please sign up for it. I can't emphasize that enough. And that gets us, Jay, to what we really want to talk about, which is the baseball playoffs. The Major League Baseball's best record this year has gone and will go to the Boston Red Sox, who are currently at 106 wins, I think, with 3 games left. The Houston Astros, number 2, are at 100 wins with 3 games left, providing we're not rained out again in Baltimore tonight or over the weekend. So a little wiggle room for the Astros. I think our best season ever was 99 when we had 103 wins. Unfortunately, we got knocked out of the playoffs in the first round. Over on the National League side, Jay, we've got a couple of great series to end the year. St. Louis is in Chicago battling for, in the case of the Cubs, they're battling for the division lead or to win the division. And for the Cards, they're battling to hold the wild card spot. Over in the West, we've got the Dodgers, who are battling for the one playoff spot in the NL West. duking it out in San Francisco with their top rival, the San Francisco Giants. So we are going to have some great baseball this weekend, Jay, and I hope it's going to lead into a great playoff as well.
Yeah, so kudos to the schedule makers, and wanted to send a shout out to somebody who's a podcast listener. You said earlier that we do have some fans in the regulated industry, and our good friend Samantha Kellen from Duke Energy was selected to be part of the SCCE, the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics Board of Directors. So it's just a real testament how somebody can come in and really get involved and make a difference. Samantha is very enthusiastic, and we would like to congratulate her as well as all the other people who are joining the board for the SCCE. So we will see all of you. I think it's less than 3 weeks away in Las Vegas for the Compliance and Ethics Institute. So we're looking forward to that. And baseball, football, Senate testimony, we've got it all this week. So for the week ending September 28th, 2018, the Kavanaugh, Rosenstein, and 100-plus win editions on behalf of myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, and Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, we'd like to thank you for listening and hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to episode 122, and I hope you will join Jay and I next week where we have another episode of This Week in FCPA. I'm pleased to announce that the listeners to this podcast can receive up to a 50% discount to Converge 18 in Denver, and I link to the event, the registration and agenda, and I give the discount code all in the show notes. It's going to be a great event, so I hope you can join us at Converge 18. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope you will listen again next week. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.